Hello and welcome to this month's Library Worklife. I'm Caitlin Williams and I'm delighted to be here with you. And as you can tell from the cover here of our presentation, we're going to be talking about transitions, taking care of yourself in that in-between time. And before we get started, I want to wish everyone a happy spring because I believe that by now spring has reached most parts of this country. So I hope that you have some sunshine where you are today. So transitions, that in-between time, that part where perhaps something new hasn't started yet, but something else in our life has already ended. It's that place where it could be something related to our job, our residence, our health, our relationship. It's when something has ended, perhaps, or is still ending, something new hasn't begun, or maybe we're a little bit further along in the transition and something has started that's new. And at the same time, our lives may feel a bit upended because things aren't the way they used to be since the transition happened. Even if it's something wonderful like graduation from our studies, we still may feel like this woman in the picture here with those Post-its everywhere, because in fact her life is upended and isn't as organized, perhaps, as it used to be. So whenever we think of transitions, my suggestion is that you think of it as a crossing of sorts. A crossing from one side of a bridge, like you see here, nice clear day, crossing a bridge, to the other side. You may just be stepping on that bridge, just getting ready to go into that transition. You may be midway across it, looking down at the water with different feelings about now that you've started that transition. Or you may be ready to step off the bridge onto solid land with something new. You could be in any stage. It still takes its toll on us in terms of it's different. And so because it is different, lots of feelings go through our hearts in terms of, oh, is this going to be good? Is it going to work for me? Will it be over soon in terms of, will I feel like everything is solid once again? Well, it will happen, but it takes time. And sometimes when we step off that bridge, we think we're stepping off into solid land, but we're not sure. Things are kind of fuzzy looking. We don't know if we've arrived yet. Now, if you've gone through any of these things, my guess is that some of the feelings that I've talked about and some that I will talk about here as we go forward are familiar to you. We all go through transitions. That's part of life. But it can be tricky at times. In this particular webcast, I'd like to talk about transitions that are professional transitions that we go through. There's all kinds that we do every day, go through transitions, but I want to focus on professional transitions. And what do I mean by those? Well, there's so very many of them, actually. Think about the different types of professional transitions as you look at this page that you might be going through or you've gone through recently or you're looking forward to. Graduation, certainly an exciting time. And for those of you who are graduating very soon, congratulations. I wish you well. But there's some nervousness about that transition. Also, we may have moved to a new location, a new city, a new state, either to find a job or to take on a new position. Now that's great, but that can be a bit scary. Perhaps we've taken on our first professional position. We've said yes to that first new position. And there's some stress that goes with that. Maybe we're making a mid-career move. We've worked at the same place for 20 years, and due to budget cuts or other factors, we have moved perhaps across town or across the country to take on a new position. And it can be a wonderful one. The point is, though, we are leaving some things that were more familiar to us, and so there's some stress attached to that. We could be taking on a leadership position. That can be wonderful, but, we take on a leadership position, how will we do? Will the new ideas we have, will they work? We hope so. We also may be transitioning into retirement or semi-retirement. We're looking forward to it. We're not sure what it quite looks like yet either. Maybe it's a bit fuzzy. All of these are professional transitions, and they all impact us greatly. We may find ourselves, when we're going through these transitions, these professional transitions, in a couple different modes. I should say three. You may be waiting, You may be in the murky middle, which is a term that Nancy Schlossberg came up with, and I'll talk a little bit about her later. And we may be hoping we may be in all three of those places. For instance, if you've just graduated, you may be a very lucky person and you have, in fact, already found a new position. If so, that's great. However, if you're like most people as they graduate, they are very busy sending out letters, resumes, they're networking, they're on the phone a lot. If that's you, you're kind of in waiting mode. You've sent out your letters, you're hoping that someone's going to call you for an interview. You go into that, and then you're waiting again to see if you're the chosen candidate. Or you might be in the murky middle. You've left behind that student role or that old position or that old city or town, and maybe you've moved somewhere new. Or you're waiting and hoping, if you've been downsized, that someone will want your skills and talents, and you're not sure who they are. Or if you've started a new job, you're still in that murky middle because things are a bit off and you don't know what to expect. You could also be hoping. Even the hope may be that now that I'm in this new transition, I sure hope things start feeling normal again. I've been at this new job for 3 months now, and when are things going to feel settled? Any of those sound familiar to you? We could be feeling all of those things. One of the big questions then becomes, how do we take care of ourselves during this time? During this in-between time? Whether we've started something new and it's not quite settled yet, or whether we're waiting to start something new, we're in that in-between time. So how do you take care of yourself so that you get through the transition successfully? Well, depending on your particular transition, there may be some certain different things that you'll need to do, but I'd like to suggest some broad ideas about what you can do to take care of yourself. And these ideas really work in most transitions. And to help me do that, I'd like to introduce you to two people, or at least the ideas of two people, who have spent their lives looking at transitions. The first one is Nancy Schlossberg. And she has spent probably 4-5 decades maybe studying transition and how people cope with them. How do they get through them successfully? And she has a model, and I'll be sharing that model with you, what she calls the 4S model. And she says, it's her belief that if you have good resources, then in fact you'll make the transition successfully. And she says this, and this is important, I want to emphasize this. She says, for everyone who goes through a transition, they do so differently. We're all unique, and our ways of going through transition are unique. So, for example, here's 3 people who have just graduated from their studies, from their LIS program, all at the same time, all with similar grades, all from the same school, and they're now all in job search mode. Well, we've got 3 different individuals and therefore 3 different experiences. Likewise, there could be 3 people who were let go from their organization or decided to leave it, and they're now on to looking for something else, something better for themselves. They all left the same day. They all had great skills, but they're each going to experience the transition differently. Just like for everyone listening or watching this webcast today, we may all be in transition of some sort, but we're all going to experience it differently. And Nancy Schlossberg says that it really depends on 4 different areas of her model. She calls the 4S model. It's sort of this resource bank. And so as we go through here, I want you to think about how much do you have in the way of resources that you can count on? And what areas maybe do you need to sort of strengthen in order to successfully get through your transition? First, I'll introduce these 4 to you, and then we'll talk about what you can do to strengthen them. So that first area, the first S, is for situation. And what she says is that it's really your perspective on the situation that makes a difference. How are you approaching this transition? Is it a situation that you like the idea of the transition? You're looking forward to the transition? You feel like you've got a good amount of control over the transition that's coming up? And the timing is good. It's coming at a good time in your life. So all in all, things are looking good in terms of this transition. Might be the case. Or you might be more like this woman whose situation is not that way. She may not have much control. She may not be happy about it. She may feel rather pessimistic about that transition coming. And there may be other factors going on for her, and she's saying, this is not great for me. Well, clearly, if you're not excited about the transition, if you have little or no control over it, if you're feeling pessimistic about it, if the timing is lousy, well, when all those things happen, then chances are that transition is going to be rather challenging for you. And that may happen when, let's say, your spouse or partner gets a work opportunity somewhere several states away and you follow as the trailing spouse or partner, then you don't have much control over that, do you? And so your feelings might be similar to what I just talked about. If you have no control, if you aren't really happy about it, it's going to be challenging. Or it can even happen with timing. Let's say that, this is not a good time because you've got a lot of other things going on. Perhaps you're caring for an elder parent. Perhaps there's other things going on with your kids. It's just not a good time. So that can make it much more difficult. So that has to do with situation. And don't worry, we're going to come back to this and talk about what can you do about that if some of those issues are coming up for you. The second S she talks about is self. And by self, she means, well, how are you approaching this transition? In fact, I mentioned timing before. Let me mention timing again here. The timing may be off. For instance, when it comes to timing, it may be an issue of, you said that in 3 months you were going to have work. You were going to find a job. Well, 3 months go by and in fact you don't have a job. That can be very stressful on yourself because in fact you were counting on that because you needed the income. So timing can be a factor. Timing can also be a factor though, not for us necessarily, but for those around us. Those who mean well, but sometimes can make it harder for us. They sort of represent what we call the society's view, sort of the social clock that can make us crazy. For instance, a well-meaning neighbor or cousin or parent or spouse or partner or old colleague may say, don't you have a job yet? Or someone in the family may say, didn't you get promoted yet? And others may say things about things that aren't necessarily professional transitions, but we call these the non-events because they didn't happen when we wanted them to, or they're non-events according to the social clock. Somebody else thinks they should have happened and they didn't. Aren't you going to get married soon? Shouldn't you be married yet? When are you going to start a family? Shouldn't that be soon? When do you get that raise? So, any of those sound familiar to you? When that happens, what Nancy Schlossberg says is, don't let that happen. Reset your own social clock. If everyone in your family has gotten a promotion by the time they turn 30 and you have not, well, maybe the time is not yet right for you, and maybe it's time for you to pause. Not see it as a failure, and think about, do I want to take a different direction? Am I happy with what I'm doing? If I am, great. Do I find other ways that I can be fulfilled in my work other than a promotion? So just pay attention to that social clock and don't let it get in your way. Then there's also the third S in her model, and that's support system. Now we know that a support system is important across our lives. Sure. We're talking about support system right now in terms of professional transitions. Our closest people that we love and love us and care about us. Our family, our intimate relationships, our friends, our colleagues, current or old ones, and if we've just graduated from our studies, perhaps our classmates. If we have a good sense of support system, research shows us over and over again that we'll get through a transition more easily than if we are isolated. So let's look at the fourth S in the model, strategies. And by this, Nancy's talking about what strategies or coping mechanisms do we have for getting through that transition? Can we adopt a problem-solving model that we look at it from different angles to see, okay, how can I approach this transition in a way that I don't see it so much as a problem, but perhaps more of an opportunity? Can I look at it as that glass full, not glass empty? Can I get together with my support system if we brainstorm possibilities? And another strategy, and I'm very serious about this, is how do we take care of ourselves? Do we play? I know it sounds like, who's got time to play? We play, meditation, mindfulness, physical activity, physical exercise. Research shows us that the more we can do that, the more resilient we become, and therefore, the better we can get through our transition. So, ask yourself, is one of your strategies to look at the glass as half full or half empty? If we look at everything as half empty, then it's more that we are viewing adversity as a really big problem. Yet, Martin Seligman, a past president of American Psychological Association, and a man who has written a lot about learned helplessness and learned optimism, he says, how we handle adversity in the workplace is probably more important than how we handle anything else. So, rethink for yourself, how am I handling it? How am I going through this transition? And what sources maybe do I want to, sort of make better for myself, spend more time on? So let's look at situation. Here's some ideas that might work for you. In your situation, when you think about it, is there a way you can take some control? Maybe not a lot of control, but if you can control parts of that transition, or at least control how you're handling it, that can make a difference. If you can look at the situation and say, can I do something that in fact will help me get through the situation and see it a bit differently, that will make a difference, especially when that social clock comes up, and we don't want that to happen. How about self? First, are you taking good care of yourself? And second, if you're going through a transition when other things are going on in your life, other stresses, can you do anything to alleviate some of those stresses so you get through it better, so you get through it without being so anxious the entire time? Can you look at the transition you're going through, especially if it's one that you didn't want to have happen? Or if it's, remember we talked about that non-event transition, that non-event, the thing that didn't happen? If the promotion didn't come through, or if you didn't move into management, or if you hoped that you could retire by now and you find that you can't, then how can you see it? How can you see the transition or the non-transition, that non-event thing that's happening? How can you see it in a way that gives you a chance to look at it as a way you can look toward your future with a different viewpoint? Is that possible? In terms of your support system, can you reach out to them more? Tell them what's going on. Tell them about the transition and ask for help or advice or brainstorming or just to be there with you. If you don't have a support system, can you start today, and I do mean today, to reach out more, perhaps to colleagues, current or old ones, classmates, current or old ones. If you've just graduated, they're much more current, but even older ones, if you've kept in touch with them. Can you reach out to them, or can you start talking with people who have a similar background or a similar interest so that you can start building a support system for yourself? Even becoming active in the community can make a difference and give us more support and less isolation. And when it comes to strategies, can you brainstorm? Can you problem solve? And back to the play thing, can you find ways to take better care of yourself physically so that you can get through? So that's part of your daily strategy for getting through the transition. You'll find that you'll have a lot more resilience if you do that. Remember I said there was one more person I wanted to talk to you about whose ideas I think are really powerful? Well, that's William Bridges, Bill Bridges, the late Bill Bridges. He passed away not that long ago. Over, 30 years, 40 years ago, he wrote a book called Transitions, and you see it there. The book was so popular that he did 25 revised editions year after year. It's a very powerful book, I recommend it. You can get it at your local library or in a bookstore. You can order it. But his notion of transitions is different than Nancy Schlossberg's, yet it's equally valuable to look at, and that's what I'd like us to do now. Here's his model. He talks about endings, neutral zones, and beginnings. And what he says is, you know what? We need to give more attention to endings. We're all into embracing the new thing that's starting up. But we also first need to recognize what has ended. For example, you've just graduated. You're delighted, right? You want to just move on very quickly to something new. But perhaps we need to, if we've just graduated, also recognize what has ended. That might be that student role, yes. Even if you're working full-time, while you were in school, you were in a student role. And I know part of that is staying up till 3 a.m. studying, getting up again at 6 a.m. to go to work. So you probably won't miss that. That's ended. But our view of life and our view of ourselves once we're no longer a student, that shifts things. So we need to acknowledge it. Or if it's a job that we left, before we move on to that new job, we want to acknowledge what has ended. We're going to miss parts of it. We need to say goodbye to parts of it. Perhaps it was people that we really liked working for, or not, but that was familiar to us, and this is something new. So if we don't make peace with what has ended, and we just keep feeling resentful about what has ended, it's really hard to embrace something new with excitement. Can't do that with a chip on our shoulder. It's not healthy. So think about whatever has ended for you, or whatever's coming up that will be ending. How do you say goodbye to it? And at the same time, he says, beyond endings, when we leave something, when something has ended, for a while, we're in sort of this fuzzy neutral zone where things feel a little off balance. It's disorienting. We haven't yet perhaps learned the names of our new coworkers if we just started a new position. We may be unemployed, and that's sort of a murky zone, isn't it? We're not sure exactly what the expectations are of that. So that can be a challenge for us. If we've moved to a new city or a new state, then we're still trying to figure out where that grocery store is that's closest to where we live. Everything feels a bit disorienting. But what Bill Bridges said was that we have to let this be and accept that. If we're able to do that, then it's much more likely that we'll get through the transition and we'll be able to embrace that new beginning. We feel excited about what's next, rather than still hanging back because we're resentful about what ended, or we're feeling disoriented. If we hang out in that disoriented place long enough, it does start to feel like things are gelling and things are feeling more comfortable. So I hope these ideas have been helpful to you, and I hope that you can try to use some of them, either with what you're going through now or what's coming up for you. And my wish for you is that you transition well. Thanks for joining us today. It's been wonderful being with you.